Several years ago, Katie and I were we were living in a parsonage similar to how we are now, and we had moved in, and it was in dire need of being painted. The outside of the house, there was wood that was starting, some of the siding was starting to rot. It was uncovered from years of weathering, and had turned into, from fading and things, it was kind of a mint, almost glow-in-the-dark green by this point. And so one of the things we had said to the trustees of the church was, we will paint it if you'll buy the paint, if that's okay that we do so. I'd never painted a house before. And thankfully picked the hottest week of the summer to do it. My in-laws came up, and my father-in-law helped us. My mother-in-law played with our son, who our oldest was like 2. And we spent days on this house. Now here's what I wasn't really ready for. The preparation, right? Because I just want to dump some paint in a tray and grab my roller and start painting. That's what I want to do. But when you're going to paint, especially outside, we had a ton of preparation that we needed to do. We had to scrape some of the paint that was hanging on for dear life that needed to go off. We had to caulk some spots that were not together anymore. We had to tape off all sorts of places to make sure we didn't get the paint in the wrong places. We had to have our ladders set up and our drop cloths ready because we had a new shingles on the roof where we were standing to paint in some spots. It was a hassle. The painting wasn't that bad, but I hated the preparation. I'm not a preparation guy. I like the thing that I was going to do. I like rolling my roller on the wall and seeing paint. I don't want to do any of this other stuff. And it was rough. It was a tough few days, but we got it done, and everything went well. But the preparation was difficult. I was telling the kids as we were kind of preparing for our picture that preparation is important. And we're going to talk about it today as we've been talking about the kingdom of God as this thing that is right here, that we can live as citizens of the kingdom based on living with kingdom values, with doing the things that Jesus has told us to do and taught us to do. But there's also an aspect of the kingdom that isn't here yet. I had a seminary professor named Dr. Bob Weber, Robert Weber, one of the most well-known theologians on worship. He's since passed away. But when I was in seminary, he would teach a class, and his thing and a lot of his books were called The Ancient Future Church. And he was talking about connecting, the old church, the ancient church, the early church, what the Bible teaches us, to the future coming. And he talked about the kingdom as something, he always said, it was something that was almost, but not yet. Almost, but not yet. It was this thing where we can live in it in some degrees, but there's also this fullness that's coming later. So the kingdom of God is absolutely, as Jesus says, the kingdom of God is at hand, and we see over and over again where He calls us to that there is something about the kingdom that we are living in right now when we choose to follow Jesus. But at the same time, there's this not yet aspect of the kingdom of God. And it's represented, as Saulene read to us, as that city where God comes and is among His people. That when Jesus returns, the fullness of the kingdom comes. Now we're getting glimpses of it. We're getting to live within parts of it, but there's a fullness that comes when Jesus returns. We see that in our readings today. This almost but not yet. And ultimately, a call to prepare. What does it mean to be prepared for the kingdom when it comes in its fullness? I want to invite you to turn to Matthew 25. That's where we're going to be today. Matthew chapter 25. We're going to look at 3 snapshots of preparation today. 3 little images of what it looks like to prepare for the coming of the kingdom of God in all its fullness. Starting in Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 1. Jesus tells this story. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out." "No," they replied, "there may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The bridesmaids who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the others also came. "Lord, Lord," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I don't know you. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." Jesus tells this story as he talks about preparing for his return. And he's talking really about patience, right? He's talking about these bridesmaids who are waiting for the bridegroom to come, and they've got their lamps and they're raring to go, but half of them chose to be smart and be ready and to bring along enough oil to last, and the other ones thought they could get by. They could skate by with what they had. And of course, when the time came, by the time the bridegroom actually showed up, they'd run out of oil, they'd gone out to get some more, and now they were gone when he came, and the ceremony and the banquet began. And now they missed the whole thing they were there for. Think about patience and the wisdom that it takes to not only prepare, but to wait for what is coming. There's a story in Genesis about 2 brothers, Jacob and Esau. Do you remember them? Twins who came out fighting from the beginning. There's a point in their life, and we learn a lot about Jacob and Esau as we read Genesis, but there's a point where they've realized that Esau, because though they're twins, he came out first, he receives much more of his father's inheritance as well as his father's blessing as the firstborn. But one day, he's out hunting, and he just gets famished, just gets so hungry, and he comes back, and his brother Jacob is making this great stew. He's got all this food, and it smells great, and Esau shows up, and he's dying, he's so hungry, and Jacob makes a deal with him. And he says, "I will give you some of this. I've been making it all day. It smells great, it tastes great. If you want some, if you're that hungry, you can have some. But first, sell me your birthright. Sell me your place in the family. Sell me that firstborn stuff that you get just because you showed up minutes before I did. If you're really that hungry, you'll trade me." And Esau was so impatient, was so hungry, was so unwise that he took it and was manipulated out of his birthright, because he was impatient and unwilling to wait for what was necessary. We read this story, Jesus talks about these bridesmaids. They're waiting to join the processional, and they couldn't handle the waiting. I think Jesus recognized that as he's telling his disciples and as he's telling his followers, some of them are going to feel this way too. That when he goes and he says, "I'm going to come, I'm going to return and come back for you," he's got some followers that are going to get impatient in the waiting. And we know that actually from basically Jesus' followers on, every generation has gotten impatient with the waiting for Jesus' return. Every generation has thought, "He's coming in my lifetime. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to in my lifetime that have said, He's coming in my lifetime. We all think He's coming in our lifetime. And He might be. We don't know. But Jesus recognized that there was going to be some impatience in the waiting. And if we're impatient, if we're not paying attention, if we're not preparing, we would miss the ability to live fully in the kingdom until it comes. We'd miss out on the bridegroom when He returns. You know, the other thing we see here is that we're responsible for our own spiritual condition as we wait for the coming kingdom. As we prepare for the kingdom that is to come, we're responsible for ourselves. You see those bridesmaids, and 5 of them were irresponsible. The other ones were much more responsible, and they couldn't fix it for everybody. We don't have enough oil for all of us. You got to go and figure this out. There's a level of that for us as well. It's nobody's job to fill up your lamp. Your faith is your own. And how you live in the kingdom that is already here matters as we prepare for the kingdom that isn't yet. The first story in Matthew 25 teaches us about patience. The second one leads even more into responsibility. Matthew 25, starting in verse 14. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. And the master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 2 more. The master said, Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man. Not the best start. Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, Take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So Jesus tells the story. And I've heard this story used a lot of ways. There are prosperity preachers that will tell you this is how you plant a seed for your own prosperity. If you give your money to me, if you give your money to us or to our ministry, then God is going to give you back tenfold what you've given because you are being responsible with a little and He will give you a lot. I've heard that taught many, many times. If you just give to God, God will give you. Jesus wasn't talking about money at all in this story. I mean, He's telling a story about money, but that's not what He's interested in when He talks to His disciples. He's not teaching us how to invest so that we can make more. What He's asking us about is, what have you done with what you've been given? Because ultimately that's part of our preparation for the kingdom that is both here and not yet. Our preparation is, what are we doing with what He has given us? That's the question. All that He's offered to you, all that He's blessed you with, what are you doing with it? All the things He's taught His followers, what will they do until He returns? All of the miracles they've seen Him perform. All of the ways that He's shown them how to live in the kingdom of God. What are they going to do until He returns? The question is for us. What are we going to do with the blessings we've been given? To be responsible to the kingdom so that when our King returns, He is pleased with us. What are we going to do with the opportunities we have? The encounters we have with other people. What are we going to do with those opportunities so that when He returns, He says, "Well done, my good and faithful servant"? What are we going to do with the gospel that we've heard? Are we going to share it? Are we going to live it out in a way that people are seasoned, are changed, and have a chance to see the light that Christ brings? Or are we going to hide it and be afraid and unwilling? You see, this one, as we prepare for the kingdom that is not yet, is about responsibility. It's not about money. It's not about investing. It's about what have we done? What have we done with what we have been given? As we prepare for the kingdom that is to come, we are living in the kingdom that is here. We are responsible for the things that God has given us. The third one. The last part of Matthew. But when the Son of Man comes in His glory, and all the angels with Him, then He will sit upon His glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in His presence, and He will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at His right hand and the goats at His left. Then the King will say to those on His right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then these righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? Or a stranger and show you hospitality? Or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the King will say, "I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." Then the King will turn to those on the left and say, "Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked, and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me." Then they will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you?" And He will answer, "I tell you the truth. When you refused to help the least of these brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me." And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life. I was watching a show that Katie and I like to watch the other day called Running Wild with Bear Grylls. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Bear Grylls, a survival guy from TV shows. He takes celebrities out into the wilderness and spends about 2 days with them, kind of trying to get from one place to another, teaching them how to survive and making them eat gross stuff that they find along the way, typically. And he was out there with a comedian and an actor named Joel McHale, and they had gone through all these difficult things. They had rappelled down this like 200-foot cavern cliff in Arizona, and they had hiked and climbed and crawled through all this stuff. They had found a dead bird and cooked it and ate it. They had done all this crazy stuff. And Joel McHale is a very sarcastic, pretty funny guy, and he's kind of making comments all the way through. But it's funny how, if you watch this show, Bear Grylls is also a believer, and you see him break down through these walls over and over again in these celebrities. He finds a way to get them to share a little bit more about really their lives and what they've gone through and who they are. He's talking to Joel McHale, and they begin to talk about their faith, and Joel also is a man of faith, and he's talking about his kids. And he says this, he says, I read this quote once, and it's really stuck with me when it comes to my kids. And he said, the quote is something like this. He said, there are some cultures in the world, and the thing they want for their kids is for them to be happy. There are other cultures in the world that the most important thing that they hope for their kids is for them to be successful. But he said, but the most important thing, or the thing that I want for my kids, is for them to be good. He said, big G, good. That's what it means for me to raise my kids. We read the story about the sheep and the goats. Again, a familiar story. It's about being good. Jesus separates people not in what they believed, or how much money they gave, or how successful they were, or how happy they were. He separates them on what did you do for my brothers and sisters. It's about kindness and goodness in the world. Preparation for the fulfillment of the kingdom requires living a life of kindness today. The values of the future kingdom happen now when we reach out to the poor and the sick and the imprisoned and the hurting and the naked, and we care for them. And that's interesting. This is radical stuff because there's nothing mentioned in here about how any of those people got in those situations. Jesus doesn't turn to those on his left and say, it's okay you didn't feed the hungry. They probably should have gotten a job anyway. He doesn't turn to him and say, that guy that I was talking about that you could have gone to and visit in prison, he deserved to be there. So it's okay that you didn't go and visit. What he did was say, whatever you've done for the least of these, you've done for me. No discussion of how they got there. No discussion of judgment of their life. No discussion of whether anybody would think that his people were right or wrong about what they did. Simply, Jesus turning to his people and saying, blessed are you who went and who cared for those that needed you. He's preparing us for the kingdom. He's preparing us by inviting us to do these things through these stories. 3 stories that teach us about patience and preparation for what is to come, knowing that Jesus will return, though it may not happen today and it may not happen tomorrow. So we got to be patient and be living out who he wants us to be as we wait for that time. We've got to be responsible with what he's given us. The gifts and the blessings that you have, he has given you for a purpose so that you can use those for good. He certainly expects us to be kind, to be good, to be a representation of who he is. Because when we live that way, if all of us in this room go out and we live these things, it has an impact on this community, right? It has an impact on the people we see. It changes your school. It changes your job. It changes your family. If you can be preparing for the future in the kingdom we've been called to today. That's what this is about. Snapshots of the future so that we can live out in preparation today. We prepare by being with Jesus in the here and now as we wait for his return.